Pain, lower wages, falling living standards. So they've done an awful lot for workers, and all of it has been negative, all of it's been very bad. So we're here protesting and bringing attention to the fact that we're at the 2-year anniversary of when 800 of our members were sacked via Zoom, and in some cases dragged off their vessels by private security guards, by an employer called P&O, and I think people have heard about it. It was roundly condemned in Parliament there behind me. But in the intervening 2 years, this government has done absolutely nothing to prevent this happening again. There could be another P&O tomorrow. So what we're demanding is that the new government that comes in, hopefully a Labour government, we're told, will include in its legislation around a new deal for workers, parity for domestic workers as well as seafarers. Because at the moment, we've got seafarers who are working below £5 an hour. Some of them are working 12-hour shifts up to 17 weeks in a row. They've got no pension entitlements, despite the fact this law, people ought to be auto-enrolled into a pension scheme. And we think something's got to be done about that. And the way you do it is through legislation. As we've seen in France, they've now applied the minimum wage to seafarers working for P&O, as a matter of fact, working in and out of Calais. So it's an absolute national scandal that the bare minimum legal protections for workers do not apply to British seafarers, and we're demanding that that's changed and that they're included.
And what's happened to all those people recently? I mean, where are they now?
They've gone on to different jobs. I mean, the employers themselves, the insolvency service declined to bring a criminal case against them. There is a civil case that's ongoing, but if you ask me, that civil case is ongoing simply so when parliamentarians are asked questions about it, they can simply say, well, there's an investigation ongoing. Nothing's going to be done to P&O. There is a a voluntary charter for seafarers, which is about as much good as a chocolate teapot. Only 4 employers in the maritime sector have signed up to it. P&O haven't. So what we're demanding is a mandatory charter for seafarers and new legislation in an employment bill that extends the basic minimums for workers to seafarers in Britain.
What has this government delivered for workers over the past couple of years?
Pain, lower wages, higher costs, falling living standards, insecurity at work, restrictive laws preventing them striking, restrictive laws preventing them protesting. So they've done an awful lot for workers, and all of it has been negative, all of it's been very bad.
And how has the minimum strikes legislation, how has that affected you?
It's not affected us yet because we haven't had employers use it against us. They were planning to use it against ASLIF in some of the strikes that they were taking in the train operating companies, but the employers withdrew from that. They said it was too complex for them to use. We still say it's unworkable. It's crazy legislation. All it's going to do is create more strikes and more division rather than solving some of the problems that they were supposedly going to set out to try to resolve. So far nothing. It might never happen at all, and that's what we hope.
If it hasn't been used, then that seems like it might have been a bit of politicking. That seems like it might have been more of a headline than a policy.
Well, it absolutely was. During the course of the national dispute, the government thought that they could isolate us. They thought they could demonise us in a court of public opinion, but they lost that battle. We won the argument with the public at large. They couldn't beat us industrially in the strikes. They couldn't beat us in the court of public opinion. So they went for legislation to try to make what we do illegal. And so far that hasn't worked either.
Sunak is very pleased with himself today because inflation has fallen to 3.4% this month, well, in February. I mean, how is that going to affect your workers? Is it positive?
Well, we don't use a consumer price index in the RMT because it doesn't take into account housing costs, which most workers have got housing costs, I'm afraid. So it's not a real measure for inflation for normal people in the country. We use the RPI index, and that's at 4.9. But look, over the past 4 or 5 years, we've seen inflation skyrocket, and as a result, most working people in this country are poorer. Somewhere between 15 and probably a quarter of their take-home earnings are less. Their spending power is a lot less. And over the course of 20 or 30 years, living standards have been falling year on year for a significantly longer period of time. So inflation might be down unless workers are getting pay rises above the rate of inflation, similar to the rates at which profits are being taken out of the economy. Their working lives are not going to change. They're going to find themselves poorer, they're going to find their jobs more insecure, and they're going to find their living standards falling.
So who's the system working for at the moment then, if it's not working for your workers?
Well, it's not working for ordinary people in Britain. The system's working very well, thank you very much, for the big multinational corporations. Their profits are copper fastened and guaranteed for them. They're making huge amounts of money, and we see it in the rail industry. We're producing some information about most of our public services, but in particular our railway is just being used as a siphon to allow public money to go through our industry and out the other end in the form of private profits and off to tax havens. So it's working very well if you're a multinational corporation without much of a stake in Britain and no investment in public infrastructure. But if you're somebody who's got to get up in the morning and go out and work for a living, it's not doing very well for you at all.
Because speaking of that, Avanti West Coast, there are rumours that it could be taken into the operator of last resort. Is that something that you would be happy with?
Well, we're waiting to see. At the moment, we're hearing rumours too. We're waiting to see what the actual announcement will be. We've heard that the Northern Authority for Rail might have something to say about this. But ultimately, the privatised model in Britain in the railways is a complete failure. It doesn't work. We don't actually have privatisation in reality beyond profits being taken out of the industry. All the decisions in the industry are being made by the DfT. All of the direction for transport is being made by the DfT. There's no competition left, so there's no rationale for having privatisation at all. Instead, we've got this kind of zombie setup where you've got private companies who are inserted into our industry like landlords, just taking rent, taking money out of our industry for absolutely no good reason at all. So it is a good thing that franchise operators are having their franchises taken off of them. But ultimately what we need is a nationalised integrated transport network under democratic control and run in the public interest.
I mean, a quarter of all rail journeys are being run technically by the public. They are nationalised. I mean, is that a good case for moving towards nationalisation?
Well, I think it's obvious. It's obviously a good case, and we've seen going in years gone by, some of these private operators were caught with their fingers in a till. Going back to Govia, they were robbing taxpayers' money, to put it frank. So we've seen all of that. We've seen the plummeting level of service delivered to the public. I mean, Avanti West Coast, they aren't able to crew their trains. I mean, some people would look at that and say, you know, they can't run downhill, never mind run a railway service. So it's a good thing it's coming back to some kind of operation in directly operated rail. But ultimately, we need the entire transport network taken back into public ownership under democratic control.
Avanti would blame the strike action that's been taken by ASLEF over the past couple of years. I mean, how much of it is to do with the breakdown between staff and management?
No, it's nonsense. Even prior to the strike action, we've seen disaster after disaster every time there's a change in the timetable. Look, this is an operator that's running this network on a shoestring. They haven't got the staff that's required. They were trying to cut staff out of the network, if you remember, during the course of the strike. They're an absolute disaster. They should never have been let have that franchise in the first place.